My fight as an American is to dissolve this very illegitimate executive, this very illegitimate administration. The POTUS, gone. VP, gone. The MAGA Congress who allowed this coup to take into fruition, gone through the guarantee clause. Now their DOJ, Pam Blondie, will say, oh, he's trying to overthrow the government. I'm a blonde. And that would be false, because overthrowing a government means overthrowing a legitimate government. The Constitution is where the government is derived from. If you arrived at the presidency through attacking and violating the Constitution, then you are not legitimate, because our American constitutionalism tax positions that there's no one, nothing above the Constitution. And then asserting yourself as above the Constitution means that my loyalty isn't to this administration. It is to the social contract. It is to the people. And this isn't my own interpretation. This is literally from the United States government. It is from the Citizens Almanac that positions that every citizen, every American exists as the guardian of the United States Constitution. That is the social contract. There's a difference between the Constitution and the government. The government only exists because of the authority that we, the people, gave it through the Constitution. If it violated that in literally trying to unlawfully prolong a certification in order to change the results, as he did during the 2021 certification in regards to the 2020 election results, as positioned by the literal Jack Smith report, where it's positioned, had he not gone into presidency, he would have been charged. And this is the reality. The DOJ dropped it because of a tradition of not going after presidents, right? However, this is rules and regulations. Above that is the Constitution. So they chose against upholding the constitutional integrity and positioned tradition. Tradition is not the Constitution. And that's my frustration, the fact that so many politicians chose tradition and honor code instead of the actual Constitution. They perceive the Constitution to be optional. And this is what the public integrity worker who literally signed the charge drops for Eric Adams showed us, that the Constitution doesn't matter as long as you still have your job. So no, it is the job of every single American citizen to literally go against this government, to literally dissolve every single thing it has built, to restore it as it was before, to remove every single loyalist from the government, to forbid them from ever coming into government again. Doji. Prison cells, doji, maximum punishment, you know what I mean, as required under the rule of law for treason. Because this government isn't legitimate, which means that you cannot overthrow an illegitimate government, because you can only overthrow a government that is given the authority through the Constitution. It was given the authority through a Democratic Congress who has no backbone. They're not upholding the Constitution. They're upholding their own honor, their own integrity, their own political status quo. So if I have to be the first one to vocalize the fact that this has to fall, and we've tried all of the lawful means, and we will continue to try the lawful means. However, what does Alexander Hamilton say in Federalist Number 9, the Union as a safeguard against domestic faction and insurrection? Do you remember Alexander Hamilton? Not you, Pam Blondie, because you don't actually know how to read. If a single member should attempt to usurp, so violate the supreme authority, that is Article 6 Supremacy Clause, that is the fact that he had an oath under Article 2, and he didn't keep that, did he? He didn't keep that because he had the Insurrection Act that was used during the LA riots to quell it, but he didn't because he intended to unlawfully extend it, didn't he? And actually, it extended until January 7th. That would be lawful if it was only through Congress, but it was through an insurrection. There's a difference between insurrection and riot. It would have been a riot had it been on any other day, not on a certification day, but there was an intent to delay a constitutional process. That is the problem. That is the political crime. He could not be supposed to have an equal authority and credit in all the states. Were he to subdue a part, that which would still remain free might oppose him with forces independent of those which he had usurped and overpower him before he could be settled in his usurpation. You see, our founding text position that we have to resist him. We have to resist you, and we have to resist this illegitimate government. The country may be destroyed on one side and not on the other. The country may be dissolved and the states preserve their sovereignty. California will not fall to MAGA. California will thrive. California will bring blue states forward. I don't care if it's with this governor that we have who hasn't done anything but talk about fires, but it will occur. You will fall. You will dissolve MAGA. Political philosopher John Locke, who was an influencer of our social contract, his words, "Wherever law ends, tyranny begins," is literally inscribed in the Department of Justice. So let's read this because it's giving us an authority to do exactly as I positioned in this video. There can be no pretense for force, so conflict, which is only to be used where a man is intercepted from appealing to the law. What happens if he refuses to uphold the court orders? What happens if he refuses to uphold the Constitution as interpreted in general, not through his own personal arbitrary definition? For nothing is to be accounted hostile force, but where it leaves not the remedy of such an appeal. So where the law is not available in order to give us resolve, it allows for the use of lawful conflict. And it is such force alone that puts him that uses it into a state of war and makes it lawful to resist him. What would happen if California went ahead and removed our taxation from the federal government? What would happen if we said we're going to be an autonomous region until you actually restore the Constitution, or we're going to secede without federal approval since the Constitution is null? They would use force, right? They would use force, but in our reality, it gives us that resolve to trigger force as well. For the exceeding the bounds of authority is no more a right and a great than in a petty officer, no more justifiable in a king than a constable, but is so much worse in him in that he has more trust put in him, has already a much greater share than the rest of his brethren, and is supposed from the advantages of his education, employment, and counselors to be more knowing in the measures of right and wrong. Now you're going to think, oh, he was joking. He was joking. He shouldn't be joking. He's POTUS. He shouldn't be joking because we have no king. Now, people are scared of martial law, and I'm not saying for us to purposely invoke it. However, in him invoking it, it allows for there to be state-sponsored violence that will invoke all of this. To this, I answer that force is to be opposed to nothing but to unjust and unlawful force through martial law, through the civilian cops. Now, the reality is that the Constitution started to become void as soon as every single branch failed to even remove him based on his literal January 6th insurrection complicity. There is one way more whereby such a government may be dissolved, and that is where he who has the supreme executive power, that was him on January 6th, neglects and abandons that charge. Now, people position that neglect and inaction isn't the same as action, and under the rule of law, it is. It is because you have the reasonable duty to actually make an action, right? Especially as commander-in-chief. And he refused to do this, which gives him responsibility in this failure, which gives him responsibility in violating his own second article oath to execute all laws faithfully as the president. Neglects and abandons that charge so that the laws already made can no longer be put in execution. That's what he did. That's what he did because he didn't want the certification to happen, because he wanted to unlawfully extend it so that he himself can illegally retake the throne. This is to reduce all to anarchy, which is why I think the Democratic Party probably went against using Amendment 14, Section 3. Eventually, it'll go to Scottus, and then it's actually going to go his route, and that's going to cause unrest, right? But at the forefront, they wanted a peaceful transition of power. However, under the Guarantee Clause, we shouldn't have a peaceful transition of power to a tyranny, a literal tyranny. They could have saw this, but they refused to because they went for political status quo versus the constitutional status quo. They acted as politicians, not as constitutional defenders, and so effectually to dissolve the government. So his act of inaction on January 6th and his continued into this presidency is what allows for this to dissolve government. So the federal government is virtually dissolved, and so is our Constitution. For laws not being made for themselves, but to be by their execution the bonds of the society, to keep every part of the body politic in its due place and function. When that totally ceases, the government visibly ceases, and the people become a confused multitude. And that's why they didn't want to challenge it. However, at the cost of us becoming into a fascist America. And this will dissolve. I promise you that, DOJ. It will dissolve, and I will be a part of it.